All right, we're live.
Ooh.
Who all is in the house? I see John Cope looks like he was first. He's here almost an hour ago, just kind of
Oh man,
hitting and running. Auto Salvage Outlaws, Blake from Bad Tree Productions, Buff Garage. Buff, congratulations. While people were congratulating you on 10,000 subs, you got 20 and now you're at 24. How'd that happen? That's pretty awesome.
that is nice.
Yeah. Dean Stevenson's here from the other side of the universe. He's in New Zealand. What time of day it must be over there. But anyway, thanks for joining us, Dean. Colleen Tebow is here. A Cove. Justin Hill, thanks for coming out. 38 POS Racing and Dan E. Boyd. Glad you guys could make it. Mohawk 62. Andrew Nelson. Andrew, you're gonna like. I was building something for you today. You just have to see it. I can't really describe. Andy Wood from Unity Motorsports Garage. Let's see. Cope is back here after coming in for an hour and taking off. Junkyard D. All right, my mom is here watching. Very cool.
Oh, mama, there we go.
All right, we've got a pretty good crowd in here. Got 21 in here as soon as we started. So, anyway, thank all you guys for coming out. We appreciate it. I told you I was going to have more guests on as we went into the summer. So we have Lake Speed Jr. on him. When I saw Lake Speed Jr. on Drag Boss's channel, I guess you could say his first introduction to me was a joke about misdirecting a urine sample and an oil sample. I said, the doctor called and he said, I run Valvoline. You might not want to open the bottle I sent you. So
Yeah.
In spite of that, he still agreed to be on my show, and I appreciate that very much. Then we ran into each other at PRI. You were at the Total Seal booth, and he was very gracious that he would do a live stream. So been wanting to make this happen for a while. But thank all you guys for coming out. We can freestyle and talk about technology to balance out the high technology Lake brings. I decided to bring this shirt to show my commitment to being Stone Age in some ways. But thanks for being on the show.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now you're traveling right now?
Yeah, so I live in North Carolina. So my home is in Concord, North Carolina, which is just outside of Charlotte. We've been there for a long time, which we'll get into that here in a little bit. But my real job is I work here at Total Seal, which is based in Phoenix, Arizona. So I don't have to commute here very often, right? But fortunately, Charlotte's a hub for American Airlines, and so is Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. So I can fly direct from Charlotte to Phoenix. I'm out here probably every month or two, something like that.
Cool.
So this happened to be one of the days that I was here for a couple of days, and I'm flying back home tonight. So we'll get finished up, and I'll head to the airport and fly red eye back home tonight.
Sounds like fun. I mean, it's an adventurous lifestyle you live, going out there monthly. Like, that's pretty cool.
Well, to be honest, I don't know anything different. My dad being, for those who don't know, right? I'm junior, so you should know who my dad is, right? Senior.
Right.
Lake Speed was a NASCAR driver for 20 years from, like 1979 was his first time getting in a stock car, doing some stuff. 80 was his first real season in Cup, and then raced through 1998. But prior to coming to NASCAR, Dad raced go-karts, which I do race go-karts growing up and stuff. But Dad was the only American to ever win the World Karting Championship. So in 1978, same year, Mario Andretti won the World Formula One World Championship, and Kenny Roberts won the World Superbike Championship. Lake Speed won the World Karting Championship. And just to kind of give you an idea of other people that have won the World Karting Championship, that would be guys like Alain Prost, famous Formula One driver, Max Verstappen, the current Formula One champion. He's former karting champion, Lando Norris, Fernando Alonso, amongst others. The guys like Lewis Hamilton raced, didn't win it. And in 78, Dad beat some guy named Ayrton Senna that never won it either. Finished second both times to Dad and some other folks. But so Dad's karting career, and I was born in 72. So all I knew was Dad going racing. We hop in the van, and we had an old Dodge van and a little two-wheel, tag along trailer that we put go-karts in, and man, went all over the country just to race for pride. They didn't pay anything to win those races, but there was a national series, and they had points, and there was a national champion, and Dad was U.S. national champion several times. And we'll tell the story now, right? It's kind of funny. So 72, the year I was born, Dad won 3 national championships in karting the same year. So they had a single 100cc class, they had a single 135cc class, and they had a twin 135cc class, and he won all 3 same year. So him and his buddy Len Haddock, they were great competitors, but good friends too. Decided, okay, well, we just cleaned house here in America. We heard about this thing they've got in Europe called the World Karting Championship. Let's go over there and kick their butt too. So they go over there, and it was, I think, in Belgium or Germany or something like that. They go show up. I mean, best stuff in the U.S. They can't even qualify for the World Championships. In the U.S., our tracks tended to be longer, more straightaways, and so karts here were usually, they all were clutch-based karts. And so you built your engines and had your pipes and everything set up to make a whole lot of power and a really short RPM range. Well, in Europe, most of their tracks were all twisty.
Oh, wow.
And they were all direct drive. They didn't have a clutch.
Wow.
And our chassis weren't really all that great in terms of handling because it was all about horsepower. Over there, man, their chassis were really good. So they get up there, they're struggling. They're not able to run good. I mean, they're like literally 4 or 5 seconds off the pack out of hundreds of karts. They're thrashing away. Eddie Cheever, who's from the U.S. but was living in Italy, was racing, and his dad came over and said, listen, we see you guys, y'all are struggling. Why don't you just take one of our chassis? Just try one of our chassis. So they're like, okay, well, they take one of the chassis. Like, what do we got to lose, right? We're not going to get in close anyway. So they take one of their chassis, put their engine on it. It's not right for what they're doing. It's nothing about the valve timing or anything is right for what they're doing. Take the clutch off, do all this stuff that they got there. And they almost qualify. And they came within like a couple of tenths of qualifying.
Wow.
With not the right stuff, right? They go back home and they're like, man, we just want to forget this even happened. Just, or that Dad and Len were both real competitors. And they're like, you know what? We're going to figure this out. So they started importing the European chassis, importing the European engine. So you can blame, credit, however you want to call it, all the European karting influence in the United States to my dad and Len Haddock. They're the guys who went over there. They got their butt kicked by it, and they brought it back. And Dad won several more championships in the U.S. racing with the European engines, the European karts. Even though they were at a disadvantage on the tracks in the U.S., because of the way the tracks are laid out here, they still raced, still won. And 6 years later, Dad was the world champion as an independent without the factory support and all that. In fact, one of the little funny stories was the year he won it was the last year he competed in it, but they were using Birrell chassis, and they were a privateer bunch, and they didn't have to bring the chassis over. The guys from Birrell by that point said, tell you what, just come over a week early. Just come to Italy, come to the factory. You can bring your engines, and then we'll just give you a chassis, and you guys can build your karts and stuff, and then drive up to the races from there. we can haul your stuff for you and everything. Oh, okay, great. So they came over and they've got their engine and they work on the chassis. And of course, the engine guys there want to dyno Dad's engines, and they're like, oh, that's pretty freaking good. American guys aren't too bad after all. So anyway, long story short, Dad qualifies. The way the championship works is that you got all these racers, kind of like the Chili Bowl. You got all these racers, and you got to have eliminations and get it down to the final group. And then basically, once you get down to that final group, you have 3 heats, and you get points for each heat. Whoever has the high points wins the world championship. So, in going through all the eliminations, the top Bureau guys are all get knocked out, the factory guys. So, but Dad makes it. So they're sitting on the grid getting ready to go for the first heat in the finals. And one of the guys from the Bureau factory runs over, has a set of tires, and says, put these on your cart. Dad and Lynn look at each other like, okay. They put these tires on. But they were the factory guy tires. They weren't the tires you could go buy. They were the factory guys tires. Dad said they were a second a lap faster. He went out there and won the first heat. They didn't give him the second heat. So everybody else got fresh ones. He's using the old ones, and he still won the second heat. He was world champion after that.
Wow.
That's the background I grew up in. I grew up going to the racetrack, knowing about all this stuff. These are the guys that I grew up around. And then, of course, Dad went to NASCAR, and it was the same story. I can tell you the exact schedule of races that NASCAR ran in the summer from probably 1980 through 1990 before I went to college, because I spent every summer with my dad working in the shop. He had his own race team. We built our own cars, built our own engines. And as a teenager, I worked on the team. I pushed a broom and all that, but then it ended up being able to go to the racetrack and travel with the guys and work on the cars some. And I remember the old nasty Talladega garage that was wooden, and there was the urinal was a trough in the floor, and it's not all the fancy NASCAR stuff they have now. But that's how I grew up. And I was fortunate enough coming out of that environment after going to college and coming back. I went to work for Melling Racing, which Dad was actually driving for them. But out of college, married, had a kid, trying to make a living for myself. And that was when the NASCAR was changing over from the Thunderbird to the Ford Taurus. And I'd come over there, and I was working for this guy doing like this handiwork, right? Just odd job stuff, painting, fixing walls, whatever. And they needed a sign put up at their place. They were putting up a new sign. So I went over there and put up the sign and everything. And I noticed, what was going on. I knew from Dad what the change was going on. Looking in the shop, and I'm like, man, there's a whole bunch of Thunderbirds in here, and it's February. You guys are kind of behind. So I went to the crew chief. I said, hey, man, I see all these cars that have Thunderbird bodies on them. I'm sure you need them cut off. And I've been there for a couple of days doing some different projects and stuff. I know all your guys are busy. I can do that. I can cut the bodies off the cars. I had to do that when I was a teenager. Looked at me kind of sideways. I know my dad's your driver. If it's weird, just say no. I'll walk away. I'm not asking for anything because of my name. I want Dad to do well. I'm his biggest fan. I see a bunch of cars here that need to get bodies cut off, and you got talented fabricators and people that need to be working on things. They don't need to mess with that stuff. And he said, toolbox is over there. Chassis number 17. Go ahead and get started. I'll come check on you at the end of the day, and we'll see. I never left. Ended up being the team manager by the 2002. In 2001, we were part of the Dodge team. When Dodge came back in, we were one of the Dodge teams. I was the team manager. And a guy named Chad Canals was our crew chief. If you're a NASCAR guy, he's kind of a Hall of Fame guy now.
Yeah, we heard of him.
Yeah. So I got to work with Chad. Chad was great. Yeah, I mean, he's all business. You know, I can tell you why Jimmy Johnson is a 7-time champion.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Jimmy's a great driver. I'm taking nothing away from Jimmy, but like anyone knows in racing, it's the car and the driver. You know, you could put Tony Stewart in a car with 3 wheels. He won't win. Sorry. He'll do good, but he won't win in a car with 3 wheels, right? You got to have.
He wouldn't finish last.
No, he wouldn't finish last. Tony's freaking good, right? It's kind of like Jimmy's like, he ain't going to finish last, you know. I remember watching one of those races when he was doing IndyCar stuff and they went to Iowa. It's like, wait, this guy knows how to drive ovals. It's like, all of a sudden, Jimmy's leading the race. It's like, he knows how to drive, you know? So the point being is that, you know, working with Chad was a great experience. We learned so much about the details. You know, one of the things that, you know, Chad was really huge on is like, for example, we had cars that never qualified worse than 4th at the super speedway. So Daytona, Talladega, we actually won 2 poles at Talladega. That's pure speed, right? Talladega, you could put anybody in that car to go qualify it. It's not the driver. It's all about how fast that car is. And we built rocket ship bullets. In fact, Chad would even go to the engine guys and tell them, give me the runt. Don't give me your best motor. Give me the runt. So I'm going to go beat all your other guys with your worst motor because our car's better than them. That was just Chad's process, his thought, how he was going to go. But what we did is we could get a car that could out-qualify everybody by 4 or 5 tenths of a second. There wasn't one trick to all that speed. It was 10 different things that added up. You know, it's a half a tenth here. It's a tenth there. It's a quarter of a tenth. You just start adding it all up. That's where the speed came from, is a complete package. And I've learned that then, and I've carried it with me. I was fortunate enough after the Melling experience. We were a single car team, and it didn't really make sense to keep going in a multi-car era. We made a play. Probably people remember this. Remember that company called Enron?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking to the guys at Enron, and we had a deal to become a multi-car team. So we cut loose the sponsor we had to do this thing with Enron to go be a multi-car deal.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then 9/11 happened right after that, right? We're like, we're broke, we're done. We hung on for about a year trying to scrape through, but it was just one of those disasters. You swung for the fence and you struck out. And we decided to close the team down, sell off the assets, and moved on. And that's where I came to work at Joe Gibbs Racing. And at Joe Gibbs, we had a relationship with a company called Lubrizol. So if you think about every different brand of oil, every brand of fuel you've ever seen, you've ever used, right? There's lots, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a short list. It's a really long list. There's only 4 companies on the planet that make the additives, the chemistry that goes into every brand of oil and every brand of fuel. And I'll give $5 to anybody who knows all 4 of them, because I guarantee you no one knows all 4 of them. Unless you've been an addict and you've been watching me for years, then you might know.
People in the chat, and you got to watch for this. Like, if anybody in the chat gets all 4 of them, they're going to win a No Name Nationals t-shirt from me. So
all right.
If you happen to see it, let me know.
We'll see if anybody knows, right?
That's right. See if you're watching your stuff. So one thing, just when you mentioned that you had been at the track, all through the 80s and in that time period, you'd have been 10 years old when L.W. Wright was at Talladega, because you mentioned Talladega. Yeah. And that was the guy that he basically faked his license to get on the track. And he kind of duped NASCAR into letting him on the track. And he finished, I think he was 2 or 3 spots up from the bottom. So he actually placed in a race with no credentials at all, then vanished for like 40 years until somebody recently found him and interviewed him last year. And anyway, he was like the DB Cooper of NASCAR. But you would have been there when he made his race. So,
probably
do
so.
you remember anything about that? When
No.
the guy just disappearing from the track, he came in the pits, they black flagged him, and he vanished.
I mean, I tell you that early mid '80s time in NASCAR. People say I'm weird about not trusting people. I mean, but there was a lot of characters that came through that era back then. It was. I remember as we traveled around the country that there would be people that would run like just that race in that area. So like when you go to Pocono, there were certain people that would show up and race Pocono,
right?
That didn't ever run in California or down in the South. But you go certain places, those guys are locals. They would show up, right? They would get the car ready and they'd come show up. I remember like Trevor Boyes, the guy from Canada, right? He would always run like Michigan and Pocono, right? The northern races, he'd show up. Trevor, he'd be there. But you'd never see Trevor, at Sears Point. That was never going to happen. But there would be out there would be the West Coast guys, the guys that ran the Winston West. That's why a guy like Harvick and stuff did so well, is because different parts of the country would have that racing scene where they ran really, really hard, and then they produced really good racers. That's why ASA, Mark Martin, Rusty Wallace, and all those guys came out of that, because those guys raced hard. They knew what they were doing, and it was a great era of racing. So I'm watching the chat. I don't see anybody. All right, so I'll go ahead and tell them. All right, I didn't think anybody's going to know, right? Because
do have a request for anybody new coming. So repeat the question for them.
Okay, all right. So there are 4 companies that actually make the additives, the chemicals that go into every brand of oil and every brand of fuel. So you've got your base oil or the base fuel that comes from the refineries, but that's not the finished product. There's the additive companies that make the additives that get blended into the fuel, that get blended into the oil to make the final product. And there's only 4 companies that make all of it. All right, that's not a bad guess from Dan.
You got to get all 4.
Got to get all 4. Right.
You get all 4 in one response, I'll send you a shirt.
All right. So I'll start talking about one of them. That was people.
Sure.
So we had a relationship with a company called Lubrizol. They're one of the 4. And they're based in Cleveland, Ohio. And where everything came about was, the backstory was that, even there in the like late 90s, like 99, 2000, the ZDP levels, the zinc in the oil, had changed a little bit, and not dramatically, not like it was in the mid 2000s when all the camshafts went flat, everything went nuts. But you got to remember, we were still running, cast cores back then. Sometimes we were doing the Stay-Lite welded stuff and things, but we were still running flat tappet cams, and we hadn't got into all the exotic coatings and the tool steels and all that yet. So here in the late 90s, we're pushing these engines really hard. And the little backstory was, Joe Gibbs Racing started in 1992. So 92 through 1998, Shell was one of the associate sponsors. If you remember the old 18 Interstate Batteries car, had the Shell Fire and Ice logos on the rear quarter panels. So Shell actually provided Joe Gibbs Racing with what they called their motorsports oil. So you couldn't buy it, but if you were one of the teams they sponsored, they wrote you a check, they'd send you the 55-gallon drums of this stuff. So that's all we ever used, and never had any problems, right? Thing was, got this oil and used it, and it was great, and things were good. Well, then middle of 98, prices of oil was way down, and Shell decided to get out of NASCAR. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. One of which was that we had already started, or basically had planned to field a second car in 99, the 20 car with Tony Stewart. And they were going to be a sponsor because they were sponsoring his Busch car at the time. Well, Shell leaves, and fortunately, Bob Nardelli was the CEO of Home Depot. They stepped in. the rest is history. Only downside is that while Home Depot sells oil, they certainly didn't have a motorsports blend oil. So we start using oil from the parts store, and we start failing camshafts. We're failing 1 in 5 camshafts on the dyno. Of course, we're blaming the guys at Comp and everybody else, and it's a mess. Good guesses, but no one's right so far.
Nothing has changed with that.
No one's even close yet.
and Justin Hill, by the way, my shirt says "I love breaker points." I had to bring some Bakelite brown rubbing block technology to counter lake speeds. Highly intelligent discussion of technology.
We'll try to make it somewhat interesting.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, we're going to the parts store. We're buying over failing camshafts. We're blaming everybody left and right. It's a mess. But we were a GM team back then, right? That was when we had Pontiacs. So GM had a thing called their key partners meeting. So what happened is once a month, the crew chiefs and engineers and stuff and would all get together, and GM make them get together and talk. Now the idea was you did not have to share any speed secrets like that. That wasn't the thing. But the whole idea was, to finish first you must finish. So GM's thing was, we want to win the manufacturer's championship. We want everyone to run. So if you do have a solution to a durability problem, so if one of the teams is having a durability problem and someone else knows the answer, you need to tell them the answer. So we show up on a key partners meeting. We're talking about the camshafts and all this. And the guys from RCR say, "Oh, you got to call Lubrizol." We're like, "Who?" "Oh, yeah, you got to call Lubrizol. We already had that problem. They fixed it."
Huh.
We're like, "Oh, okay." So there's actually an SAE paper that was written by the guys from 76 and RCR and Lubrizol that tell the whole story. So what happened was that 76 changed the additive package in the oil. Lubrizol had this new whiz-bang additive package, triple detergent, they called it. And so they put this stuff in the oil, and all of a sudden RCR, which they were getting free oil from 76, started having problems. And they recognized, hey, it was the oil problem. Like, old batch, don't have a problem. New batch, we got a problem. It's the oil, right? Well, the problem was they went back to 76, who was the blender. They had a refinery. They made the base oil, but they had to buy the additive package. So they said, the problem's the additive package. You got to go to Lubrizol. They're the guys who make the additive package. Work with them. Whatever they come up with for you, we'll blend it and give it to you, and that's how it goes.
Huh.
So they tell it, and they fix their problems. We're like, oh, okay. So we call Lubrizol, tell them the problem. Yep, no problem. Boom. They bring the fix. Camshaft problems eliminated. If you go look in the record books, you'll find that in 1999, Bobby Labonte finished second to Dale Jarrett in the championship. He lost 2 engines during races, both to failed flat tappet cams in the race. We lost that championship by 1 race's worth of points. In 2000, Bobby Labonte won his first and Joe Gibb Racing's first NASCAR championship without a single failure. Well, you're almost right.
Oh, not quite.
He's got 2 of them. He's got 2 of the 4.
Keep working on it and try again.
2 of the 4. Doing pretty good. One of those is actually a raw material manufacturer. They actually manufacture one of the components that ends up being used. Now the fuel part, BASF does make some fuel additives, but they don't make oil additives. So you're getting pretty close there, Ed. You're doing pretty good. All right. He's Googling the hell out of it right now, right?
Ed's machine is a machinist in Arkansas, and
I know.
He does a lot of work
for our stuff. He's good.
It's great.
Yeah. So we're gonna get pretty close out of everyone's things, but we'll get there. So anyway, we go to Lubrizol. They get us the stuff, and in 2000 we won that championship. That was Lubrizol products. The previous year we didn't have Lubrizol products. It's that simple. We went from winning races but not winning championships to winning races and championships. In fact, the little stat I like to share is that in those first 8 years of Joe Gibbs Racing, we won 16 races, 0 championships. We met these guys named Lubrizol. We started working and putting chemical engineering into the cars. In the next 8 years, we won 86 races and 5 championships.
Wow.
Yeah, not a statistical anomaly. And so it was really great to be a part of that, to be there during all of this development. Now, those are the glory days of NASCAR when the budgets were pretty much unlimited. And we were, every NASCAR team top NASCAR team had some connection with the Formula One team. That when we were working on the coatings, is getting closer. You got to drop the BASF. That's not one of them. They do some stuff that's used in fuel, but they don't make a complete fuel additive package. So it's the additive packages that matter, you know. So yeah, it was. So we were able to actually literally work with McLaren, Formula One guys, and figured out the right process to handle the DLC coatings for the lifters, so we could actually have better durability. 1 year at the Coca-Cola 600, actually won the race because it was rain shortened. If it hadn't been rain shortened, all of our engines would have blown up.
Now, when did you start working with DLC coatings? Because I know that comp cams have started putting out DLC coated lifters for common cams they sell. They put them out at PRI in December. And
Yep.
So what's your experience going back with that? Because it seems like it's going to be a really good deal.
DLC is the bomb when it's done right. I mean, and the good thing is now there's a lot of experience, so people should have a good handle on how to do it. We started using it in the early 2000s. And so it straight out of Formula One, putting on the lifter. So it's you have what the wrist pins, the DLC on the wrist pins is the greatest thing ever for wrist pins. And then we started putting on the camshafts and the lifters. We figured out the best bang for your bucks is putting on the lifter, not the camshaft.
Right.
But the great thing about it is it really reduces friction. They live forever. I was saying the 1 year at Charlotte for the 600, every engine we had was going to blow up if they had run the full 600 miles. The DLC was coming off, and it was, once it comes off, it's like having like the old shoeback lifter when you would break them. I mean, it's just stuff goes everywhere. You know, it's like having grit blast in your engine. It's awful. So getting the process right in terms of the preparation on the surface before you apply the coating, and not all DLCs are the same, getting the right type of DLC and putting it together and getting the batch size figured out and all that, getting real close.
We also have
Salvage Auto Outlaws is 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you're missing one. So Lanxess makes components. They don't make DI packages. So you're really close. But the rest of those 3, you're right on.
I love this.
Yeah, so Lanxess makes components, you know. So, but you're close, though. There's only one missing. I haven't seen it pop up in the chat yet, the other one. Well, if it pops in there, we'll get it. So they're one of the king daddies of the deal. They've been around for a long time. They changed names, too. So if you don't, if you got old history, you may know them as somebody else. I'm not going to say the name because that make it too easy to Google it and find it.
Well, I don't want to derail your train of thought, but Colleen does have a question whenever you want to get to it.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, like, do you know Richie Parker? Everyone who says they can't needs to watch his story.
I don't. I have to figure that one out then.
Okay. Well,
I know Richie Evans.
fill us in, Colleen. But you're saying that the DLC has come a long way. I'm excited to try it because I have an engine that I was considering going to roller, and now I'm thinking I want to do a flat tap it with DLC.
Yeah, I mean, it's DLC is fantastic. I think it works great. We have some DLC coated wrist pins and some parts in my dad's engine. They work great on the lifters, even roller lifters like the Jessels. They're black. Rather black is DLC. So if people didn't know that, that is what's on the body of the Jessel lifters when they're black is the DLC coating. We actually do DLC on piston rings because it says a very,
Really?
very low. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
How do they break in?
So, all right, so let's go there. All right.
Sure.
So modern piston rings, now, not the old days. I'm saying
Right.
now, modern steel piston rings are actually already broken in before you even put them in the engine. What's breaking in is the cylinder bore finish. Because I'm here right now in Phoenix, Arizona at Total Seal, about 20 feet that direction is a giant OD lapping machine. And we take those rings that we coil and make right here in this building out of steel. So it takes steel wire, coils it. There's a video we got on our YouTube channel if you want to know all the details. That takes it, turns, coils it. We heat treat it. We do side lapping. We do all the profiling, everything. But those rings go into that OD lapper. And we have a diamond slurry in there. So think about like a butter churn. Those rings go in there and it sits there and rocks them back and forth. Because in the old days, going way back, 100 years ago, piston rings were square. So what happened was they rocked edge to edge. So over time, they would rock and lap in, and then they became rounded like a barrel face.
Yeah.
That was how a piston ring was broken in, was that barreling and rounding. And then the outside edges they probably weren't always, they call it light tight. If you put the ring inside a perfectly round cylinder, the rings weren't necessarily always round yet, and they had to wear in to become fully round, both, this way and that way. Well, we do that in that machine. So when they come out of that machine, they're already broken in. They're completely light tight. We check all that here. We put all the coatings on them, and then you can go put it in the engine. So what's happening is the cylinder wall surface finish is what's breaking in. That's the reality of the day. Yeah, 50 years ago, when there were still a bunch of square rings and stuff out there, that's not the case. The rings are still breaking. And if you have chrome rings, that's still true. A chrome ring, close. Unfinished projects, close. Evonik makes components, not DI packages. They make the viscosity modifiers. So they sell that. They make the components and sell it to Lubrizol and to Afton and some of those that make some of the polymers that go into it. It's close though. Guys are getting there. You're still missing the one.
We've got them stirred up good on this. I like it.
Yeah. So technically, too, people are saying, I've said Chevron. I think one of the guys mentioned it. It's Chevron Ornite. So it's a division of Chevron. It's not, I guess it is part of the Chevron, but getting close though, guys, getting close. There's one big one still left. No one's touched on yet. But anyway, so that's what you're doing is breaking in. Well, here we go. Yeah, not InnoSpec. So InnoSpec only makes lead anymore. They're not an additive package manufacturer. Allegheny's a blender. TRI, nope. So the two on your list, Ed, that are actually additive manufacturers that make DI packages, Lubrizol and Afton, they're both right. BASF makes intermediates. InnoSpec just makes lead. They don't make anything else. Allegheny's a blender. Okay. Nope, not Global Tech. Ornite, Chevron Ornite. Yep. Lubrizol, Afton. Those three are right. So we got 3 of the 4 so far. You guys are doing really good. Most times guys like questions, I get a bunch of blank stares. Like, what? But the cool thing is, so who really had ever heard of any of these brands before? Like nobody. The brands of your oil, but you have no idea who actually made the stuff in there. I would say RSS Seal Power is lapping in the 70s. That's probably why they were one of the big brands, right? But because you think back, the origin of the piston ring actually predates the internal combustion engine. A guy named John Ramsbottom, a British engineer, in 1852, invented the piston ring for steam locomotives. Prior to that, locomotives have been around for at least 30 years.
You know what? I actually knew that.
Oh, Brad Lagman! Woo! In the house, Brad.
Where I learned about that ring was from you.
Okay, yeah.
Because you had mentioned that somewhere before. I think it was like a conference or something like that you'd had on YouTube or something. But you had mentioned something about that ring being used in automotive, like a locomotive application before cars. I didn't know that. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, so the little bit of history, right? So he invents this thing in 1852, not DuPont. So not DuPont. Oh, there it is. We finally got all four of them now. I'm not going to tell you who's got the right combination, but
put them all together, all four.
But one of them, the missing one just popped up.
Okay, so you guys got to put all four together in one guess.
Someone's got to put all correct four. There's no particular order, but you got to get all four on the same one.
That's it.
It's close. Now,
the four have been seen in here.
I've seen all four of them.
It's going to happen now.
Where the hell were we? I got distracted by that. That and Brad showing up. Brad's my buddy. I love Brad. Yeah. I'm just staring at the comments now, so I'm jumping.
Yeah. It's a fun.
Steam engines. Thank you. Steam engines. Yeah. Right. So before Ramsbottom invented the metallic split ring design, they literally would like pack hemp or cotton or something in there. Mm-hmm. And then other kind of a fun thing is when they first did the piston ring, they made them fully round. They weren't cam coiled where they would have tension. It took them about 8 years to figure out they would live a lot longer. We should have done this live from Monty's. You're right, Brad. It's been much tastier that way.
You can be on and you two can do a sequel. You're welcome to.
All right. Then they find out you need to actually have some cam coil to it so that it has tension. So it's only round when it's compressed. It helps hold it in the ring grooves a little bit better. But so anyway, that's the other little fun thing is, so 1852 was 7 years before the first oil well was ever drilled in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and still about almost 20 years before Otto invented the spark ignited internal combustion engine. So yeah, piston rings have been around for a long time. Oh, don't be throwing Song Wan, that Chinese crap. Get that out of here. Out of the chat. No, they don't count.
So what encouraged you to get into the trajectory of the automotive arts and sciences that you did? Because I mean, there's so many different avenues you can take within the world of
boom. All right, there's unfinished product wins. Unfinished project wins the day.
Unfinished project wins everything.
He's got it.
So this is it. Lubrizol, Afton, Chevron, and Infinium.
Yep. So Infinium's a joint venture between Shell and ExxonMobil.
How about that? So well, Unfinished project, who wins everything. I actually know who you are. I'm one of the few people on YouTube who know who you are, and I'll get you your shirt.
Cool.
That was fun. That was fun.
I really enjoyed that. That was great, actually.
Andrew Nelson's got a question here. Right. And by the way, if you're not familiar with these guys, there's a lot of really cool guys in this chat building cool stuff, talented guys, and Andrew Nelson is one of them. What would you recommend for a drag and drive oil additive package for NA and for turbo?
So I've always said when it comes to oil, there's the 4 R's. You want to have the right oil, which is the right viscosity and the additive package for the application at the right place, right time, right amount. What determines the right viscosity is going to be 2 main factors. It's going to be the bearing clearances in the engine, all the running clearances in the engine, and then the temperature that the engine runs at, specifically the oil temperature. because you could have, just say, for example, we'll just say a small block Chevy, 3,000 main and rod bearing clearance, right? Clearances. If I'm drag racing that engine, I can run a 0-20 in that engine and run just fine. I'll have good oil pressure. Everything's great. But if I take that same engine, same bearing clearances, and I go try to circle track race it, I'm going to have to probably run at least a 10W40, maybe even a 2050. Because all oils get thinner as they get hotter. And think about like maple syrup, right? When you take it out of the refrigerator and you start pouring your pancakes, it's a little bit thick. But it hits the pancake, super hot, what happens? Thins out. So just like maple syrup or any kind of syrup, oil gets thinner as it gets hotter. But what will happen is, regardless of what the water temperature is, because like on a dyno, guys who are dyno guys who know this, you can fire that engine up and that water temperature is going to race up way faster than the oil temperature does. But then eventually the water temperature is going to stabilize. What happens to your oil temperature? Keep running it higher and higher and higher and higher. It goes over. So if you don't have an oil temperature gauge in your car, you have no idea what your operating viscosity is. So you want to know what your bearing clearances are. You want to know what your oil temperature is. Then you can choose the right viscosity for the application. Because you don't want to be too thick. You're giving up power and you're giving up flow. I've seen piston scuffing that's only down to the fact that the guy is using too thick of an oil. So you're not getting enough oil where it's supposed to be when it needs to be, right? If you're having a lubrication problem, ask yourself those 4 questions. Right oil, right place, right time, right amount. You will find the answer by asking those 4, always. So, an NA engine usually isn't going to generate as much oil temperature as a turbo engine because the turbos are typically oil cooled. So they will put it in. But the reality is, for a drag and drive deal, you're going to be building more temperature because you have to drive the car to the track, right? Now, if it's one of these drag and drive deals where you drag or you drive, then the car sits overnight and you basically drag racing the next morning, well, that's different. Now the engine's cold. If the engine's cold, it's going to be different, if you're trying to really optimize every last little thing, right? I don't think anybody wants to really change their oil at the racetrack, but you got to kind of figure these things out on what you want. But if you know those things, then you can figure it out. Now, when it comes to the additive package, what you're going to want is something with a fair amount of ZDP. When I mean fair, you don't need to have more than probably 1,500, 1,600 parts per million of ZDP. Everyone has this idea that the more ZDP you put in the oil, the better it is, like the less wear you have. That's actually not true. So if I had a chart, I probably can't really draw it all that great, but kind of imagine going vertical. If on the vertical axis is wear, and the horizontal axis is the amount of ZDP. When I have very low ZDP, I'm way over here, my wear is really, really high. As I start adding zinc to the oil, my wear starts to come down dramatically. But then as I keep adding ZDP, it'll kind of stay around here. But then I keep adding more ZDP, it starts to go up and increase and increase and increase. One of the reasons why, like the driven braking oil has 2,500 to about 3,000 parts per million ZDP is because we actually need the engine to wear in. There's so much ZDP that it's actually causing corrosive wear on the parts intentionally. Because what happens is, no, get that. Don't put that in anything. Don't put any additives in anything ever. If you have to put an additive in your oil, it means you have the wrong oil. Go get a different oil that's got the right stuff in it. Don't play chemist at home. I don't even play chemist at home, and I know what I'm doing, right? So what you're trying to do with that higher level of ZDP is back to that our chart. Well, why is the wear so high when the ZDP is low? Well, that's because you're having abrasive wear. You have metal to metal contact and stuff is scoring and galling is bad, right? When I get over here, the ZDP film on the part is so thick that it's sloughing off the metal. So the additives aren't like the Teflon, right? Teflon doesn't bond, doesn't exchange electrons with the base material. It's just on top, and it gets knocked right away. That's why it doesn't work. It can lower friction, but it can't reduce wear because it's not chemically bonding to the surface. ZDP, the phosphorus part of the zinc dialkyl thiophosphate, that's the proper name, actually reacts with the iron and creates what they call a phosphate glass film. That film is what's actually wearing away. It's a sacrificial film to protect the base metal. But it's forming, wearing away, reforming. If you've ever scraped paint off of a car, you're going to know that when the paint is really thin, it's a booger to scrape off. If the paint's really thick, man, it comes off like butter. Same thing. If my ZDP film is really, really thick, it can just slough right off. If it's really thin, it's hard. So when I'm using the braking oil and I've got high ZDP and essentially almost nothing else in there, I don't have friction modifiers like Molly. I don't have other detergents and all that kind of stuff in there that would change the thickness of the film. I can create this really big, thick film that allows me to have controlled wear. I can take the parts like that flat tappet lifter, because literally if you actually look at it, that flat tappet's going to have taper to it. The cam part is, right? The cam lobe. The lifter has a crown on it. When you break in a flat tappet properly, if you take a profilometer and measure that surface, you're going to see there's actually a crown, the reverse radius of the lifter wears into that cam lobe. That's what happens. This wears into that and it mates. It really happens when it's done right. If it doesn't, it's bad, right? That's where lifters fail and everything goes bad if it doesn't mate properly. So what we're trying to do is use the chemistry to speed up that process. It's kind of funny. I worked with Billy Godbold for years when Driven was part of the comp ding, and I don't know how many freaking camshafts me and Don McCaskill at Shavers put in that small block Chevy, and we measured every single cam lobe on every single cam back at comp, and to see all the wear on everything, it was ridiculous. It was great though. In doing all of that, we learned what works, what doesn't work, and we basically were able to get in. When it's done right, even though you have a 20-minute, 1,500 RPM or 2,500 RPM camshaft break-in, when it's done right, that cam is broken in 3 minutes. That's all it takes if it's done right. Now, it might die by 30 minutes, right? But it actually started to die in the first 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is one reason why I'm not a big fan of just putting a bottle of ZDP in. Because what do people do? They're going to put the oil in. They're going to pour in the valve cover, right? I'm going to pour in my 6 quarts of oil. Then I'm going to pour in my last quart, my last little 8-ounce bottle of zinc. When you fire that engine up, where is that zinc? It's in the valve cover. Yeah. It ain't a band. It's not mixed. Dude, you wasted your money. Get the right oil, then you're good. It's the chemistry is your friend. So to answer that question, super long-winded was, you want to have the right viscosity for your temperature. So figure that out. Then you want to have an oil that's got about 1,500 parts per million ZDP in it. Then you want to have something that's probably has at least, 300 or 400 parts per million molybdenum in it. So where that ZDP film's thick and everything's sloughing off, why don't you bring the ZDP down a little bit and you add in the moly, now you get that really thin film that's really tough and it's low friction. So that combination of ZDP and moly, that's where the wear goes way down, and that's what you want.
And it would free up a little bit of power to boot.
Absolutely.
We got a couple good questions here. Ed's asking what you think.
I don't talk about brands of oil.
Yeah,
I don't.
know
I'm not. I'm not going to say anything good. I'm not going to say anything bad about any brands of oil.
Well, but then
because I don't care about brands.
Right. Talk about the chemistry and what makes for a good oil, regardless of who makes it.
See, that's the question. That's what I'm all about. Because I mean, nothing, and I'm not saying anything bad, right? And so please don't. No one get your feelings hurt, right, by me saying that. I don't care about brands because I know that every brand buys their additives from one of those 4 companies. None of them make it. When it comes to synthetic, do you know how many manufacturers of they call PAO, your Group 4 synthetic base oils there are in the world? 3. You got another t-shirt you want to give away?
I'm game.
Who actually makes PAO synthetic base oil? Yeah, I am. Boom, Iceman. You got it. I am brand agnostic. I don't care about the brands. I love chemistry. So I can tell you this. So what's the right chemistry? The right chemistry for break-in is going to be different than after break-in. So the right chemistry for break-in is that higher level of ZDP, probably going to be between like 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million on the ZDP. Very low detergent, less than 1,000 parts per million detergent. No friction modifiers, no moly, no boron. You don't want any of that mess in there. That's break-in oil chemistry, and it works. I've seen it. Piston ring guys, hey, we've been living bad break-in oils for a long time. We know what break-in oils work and which ones don't. And I can prove it. We've seen it over and over again with blow-by. You put in one oil, that thing was friggin' oil, and the cylinders won't break in. You put in a different one with the same rings, seals right up without even touching the hone. You just change the oil, it will change the blow-by. Just because of how that cylinder wall has to break in. Get the right chemistry, it's going to work right. So that's break-in. Now, for a street application, I mean emissions legal, bone stock, and all that, dude, just whatever your owner manual says for API, just go get an oil that has that. Call it good. Change it regularly. Are there differences between brands on the street? Yeah. Some are to the low end of the spec. Some are the high end of the spec. But the biggest thing is about oil change intervals, keeping it clean, not overheating it, don't get it full of fuel. Fuel is the enemy of your engine. Absolutely. We do used oil analysis, and I look at oil analysis reports every single day. I looked at 10 today. I looked at 24 yesterday. And I can tell you 99 times out of 100, when we see high levels of wear, we're seeing either fuel or water. I don't care what brand it is. There's more difference in contamination in terms of wear than what the brand does. Why? All the brands buy their stuff from the same 4 companies. Now, not everybody has the same chemistry. They all have the same balance. So there is differences in brands. But if you get the right type, right? So if you're breaking in an engine, you need a break-in oil. Just because it says break-in on the label doesn't mean it's necessarily the right stuff in the bottle. You got to check the chemistry and see, right? And to make sure they got the right kind of balance. For API stuff, especially with modern cars, so many of the cars now are direct injection, turbocharged. Well, if you have a diesel oil, for example, because people used to love put Rotella and everything, don't do that. Diesel oils have a high level of detergent. That high level of detergent can cause engine knock in direct injection engines. So the latest API SP oil spec, actually the engines have to pass what's called a low speed pre-ignition, a knock type test. This is based on the oil. And if the oil has more than 1,500 parts per million calcium, it really can't pass it. And the diesel oils used to have 1,000 parts per million. And what's funny is people that have known me for a long time will know that we always, back in the driven days, talked about the zinc versus the detergent balance. So I saw someone mention a little thing about VR1, and it's an interesting story there. So when we did all that camshaft testing at Shavers, and what we would do, calcium and oil. Calcium's a detergent additive in oil. It's basically there to neutralize acid, just like calcium is in Tums to neutralize your stomach acid. They can put that calcium in the oil to neutralize the acids created by the engine. That detergent competes against the zinc. Zinc's trying to create a film to protect the parts. Calcium's trying to wash everything away. And it used to be the old Valvoline VR1 was an oil that had a whole lot of calcium. It had some zinc in it, but it had calcium and sodium, another detergent. So it was pretty aggressive. So that was one of our, we call them bad oils that we would use for our camshaft testing. Because we would basically get these cams made at comp. And they were all custom design cams to try to make them fail. So they were very low taper, really short nose radius. We didn't put any Parkerizing on them. We did everything we could to make the cam be as close to dying as we possibly could, so we could measure the wear in a short amount of time. We could put them in and run it for a couple hours, and then
makes sense.
And do that. So we would do this test where we would basically get the cams, put them in the engine, do a 30-minute cam break in, pull them back out, send them back, remeasure them. Once they were measured, we could put them back in. We could do durability testing with oil. So the durability test, we would use the VR1 as kind of our standard known. This oil won't fail the cam, but it will have a high level of wear. And all of a sudden, we go to the store and we go buy a VR1, but they've changed the chemistry. They've changed it from the old SN formula to the new SP formula. The sodium's gone, the calcium's down, and we went from having about 6 thousandths wear per lobe, like average, down to 2/10 of a thousandths.
Big
lobe.
Difference.
Oh, it's huge.
That's everything.
The zinc level never changed. They just changed the detergent balance, and it changed that oil from like one of the worst to one of the better ones right off the go. It was pretty amazing what you could get to, and that just showed. And we saw that there was about 3 different oils that we would kind of know that were in that bad category. Once all 3 of them went to SP, they all got better because of that.
That's you just see.
Yes, Iceman. Absolutely. Yeah. Thinner rings are the way to go, Well, so I wouldn't do an 040, but you could do either an 043, 043.3, or do a 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter. Those are excellent ring packages for anything naturally aspirated. They work so good, You can even run them a boost. I mean, with the Engine Performance Expo thing we've been involved in, me and Ben Strader, we've got a supercharged, it's we call it Pro Charger. So you got Pro Charged LS. It's a 392 that at 20 pounds of boost makes 1,385 horsepower with the 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter ring package in it. And that's a gapless, gas ported top ring in that thing. Yeah. Okay. So great question, just Mopar Joe. So when it comes to the MLS, I mean, I know that they've wanted to have a different kind of RA than the conventional gaskets, because the conventional gaskets could kind of let you do with whatever you want. They're kind of like a ductile moly ring. You can throw whatever finish you want at it and it'll work. But the newer way to go with MLS is look at what's called RZ. So RZ is kind of your peak to valley height, versus RA is just the roughness average. If any of you guys know, Brad's in here, if any of you guys have followed Brad and what he's doing with his software and stuff that we get from digital metrology from Marburg, I mean, that is the way to go. Is that because your problem is like if your RA gets too high, get too rough, it won't seal because it's steel. It can't conform. But if it's too smooth, it also can't really. It needs to have something for it to go. Now, I do believe that. Is it Cometic? I think Cometic has a coating now on the MLS gaskets that are supposed to make it a little more. But I would leave that question specifically if you've got a Cometic MLS gasket, I'd ask them what their range is. I forget the numbers off the top of my head right now, or if it's a different brand, ask them what it is. I can tell you about surface finish off for a cylinder wall off the top
And
of my
that's
head.
something I wanted to segue to. So I enjoyed watching that video series of you reviving your father's engine that had been sitting for 20 years. I loved that. That was the
We've had a
greatest.
lot of fun with it.
And I love the collaboration on it. I believe it was Billy Gobbold did the camshaft for it.
Mm-hmm.
You had Greg Anderson showing us using the Rottler machine in their shop. I couldn't believe that. That's just something you don't see.
There you go. I just gave you the answer. 50 RA or smoother.
There you go.
What you need to be.
Like I couldn't imagine Warren Johnson showing that on camera.
No, that would never happen. Grumpy or Warren and Glidden would have never let that. Never in a million years would that have happened.
Actually, I don't think I've ever.
What's funny is we still get comments like, "Oh, that's not how they really do it." I'm like, no, that's how they really do it. That's really how they do it.
I don't think I've ever told this story on YouTube. One time I went to Warren Johnson's shop. They opened the door because he says it's not marked. It's an unmarked shop. I mean, you wouldn't know what goes on in there if you didn't know what went on in there.
Right.
The guy opens the door and then he looks over his shoulder, moves the door a little bit like he's obscuring something. They're pretty secretive, and I think it's great, But no, I thought that was really cool and got to learn a lot about surface finish from that. I thought that was pretty cool. So, you have any advice for people doing surface finish before they invest in a good set of rings?
Well, it's huge. So obviously the we'll call it engine number one. That was the one that had overheated and sat there for 20 years. And we put it in the dyno. It was down 200 horsepower from where it was new. And then, we freshened it up. Greg honed it, and Billy got some new valve train and all that. But we kept the same blocks, heads, cranks, rods. John Callies at Morrell gave us brand new black Mamba lifters. I mean, he was so nice to do that. I mean, he didn't have to go do that. I mean, it's out of his kind. It's like, you're going to put roller lifters in there. You already have some, but here, let's put some bushing ones in there. Let's do it right and make it nice. And gave us some black Mambas. They're awesome because they're DLC coated. They're beautiful. All right, so we get this thing, put it back together. Same block heads, manifolds, crank rods. The guy at CP Carrillo looked up the rods. They were made before my youngest child was born, or oldest child was born. We put them all together, and the engine made 790 horsepower.
Yeah, I know it was a bunch. I just couldn't remember what the exact pull was.
Yeah, almost. We were 8 horsepower shy of 800.
I was gonna say it was like 100 more than it was.
It was 100 more.
Yeah. Wow.
So that begged the question, right? How much of it was the piston, the ring, the hone?
Right.
How much of it was the valve train?
Right.
So there's engine number 2. That engine had a brother, and it was sitting on the floor, and it had been freshened up. That was Dad's actually his A piece that he had been racing that had, the most. We drug it off, put it back in the dyno, ran it. It made within 1 horsepower of what it was brand new 20 years ago. It had never been run, right? It basically, it had run the dyno, a couple of break-in runs, and then just set.
Wow.
And it made within 1. So on that one, we did not change the valve train. We just had Greg hone it, same bore size. CP Carrillo gave us the same pistons. We went from the full round piston to the side relief style piston. But we went from the old 400 grit finish to the 170, 600 type finish like we're doing now. Brad knows that deal better than anybody. The proper plateau finish. But we went from a 043 top, 1.5 second, 3 millimeter oil to a 0.7, 2 millimeter ring package. And that engine made 730 brand new, and it made over 770 fresh and done.
Wow.
We picked up 40 with the hone, the rings, and the pistons.
Wow.
40.
Wow.
Yep.
That's really significant.
And the cool thing is the heads on that engine are better than the other one. So it actually made 777 without the good carburetor, without Q16. So you know what's going to happen here pretty soon. Because the other carburetor is on Dad's A engine. It's in the car. We're loading it on the trailer on Sunday night. We're going to the racetrack to put him back in the race car on Monday. So Monday, Tuesday, we got the track rented at VIR. Dad's going to go out there and try to bust off some laps with 100 horsepower up from where he was 20 years ago, see if he can outrun his lap times from 20 years ago. The guys at Goodyear gave us some brand new tires for free. They were great to help us out on that. So we're going to go find out and see what happens. But once that's done, that carburetor comes back off. We're going to put some Q16 in that bad boy and put it on the other engine and see if we can't hit 800, because I want to get 800 really, really bad.
You're going to get it one way or the other.
Well, Doug Yates said they never made 800 with a C3, so I got to beat Doug Yates.
Well, you can do that.
He didn't say it had to be NASCAR legal.
So I don't want to assume that you've had opportunities to get in those cars, but what have you ever gotten behind the wheel, and what are your interests ever been with that?
So I got my first go-kart when I was 4.
Yeah.
And then I started racing when I was 8, raced go-karts till I was a teenager. And that was around the time Dad, moved to North Carolina and went, serious NASCAR racing. So I never got to go racing anymore after that. Then when I went to college, he was like, "Hey, you want to go race late models? So you can go to college here locally, and we can try to go do that." But I also knew at that point in time that Dad didn't have any money for that. He barely had. Yep, he wins again. That's it.
Well, that makes it easy. You get a black and a gray, and I already know your size.
One shipment makes it real simple. Notice how none of those are brands that almost anyone knows. Right? Everyone knows Chevron. Everyone knows Mobil. No one knows anything else. So all the other brands are just buying their stuff from somebody else.
Right.
That's why you can't get too brand loyal and get too carried away. Love the chemistry, not the brand. But anyway, where were we?
Talking about racing late models, possibly.
Oh, yeah. So Dad never had any big sponsors. In fact, it's funny. When I worked at Melling, being the team manager, I got to have all the records. So in 1988, when Dad won Darlington, that was his best season as a driver. We had our own race team. We built our own engines, built our own chassis. We won Darlington. Wins was a sponsor. Wins, I know it's an additive company. How ironic is that, right? Oil additive company from way back then. But that was $900,000 total budget, the Wins Kmart car. That same year, that was 88, Bill Elliott won the championship. Coors gave them $1.9 million. They won the Winston Million that year as well. So they had $2.9 million. They literally had 3 times more than we had.
Wow.
And that was Dad's best year, financing wise. Toward the end of the year, like 98, we had the Cartoon Network car. The Cartoon Network thing was around $3 million back then. And the Melling guys kicked in $1 million as well. So we had about a $4 million budget there. And we'll call it 99, 2000-ish. Of course, when Junior comes in 2000, the Budweiser deal was $8 million the first year. Within a few, and it went up $2 million a year. So the Budweiser deal when Junior was in the 8 car peaked at $20 million.
Gosh. And that's in a relatively short amount of time, that kind of scale, when you think.
Oh, the DEI deal, when Junior came in, that thing changed the landscape on everybody.
Yeah.
They had more money than anybody else. I mean, they did a great job. Obviously, those race cars were amazing. You know, I think that anybody can tell that. The guys who look at their careers before they got in a DEI car, look at their careers after a DEI car. That tells you how good those early 2000 DEI cars were.
Patrick's asking how you think the SRX series is doing.
Yeah, I watched a couple of those races when that first season, whenever that was, but I haven't really watched any more of it. Unfortunately, I'm probably a bad guy to ask, because I'll just be honest, right? I'm really jaded with NASCAR. They took something that was amazing and awesome that we all loved, and they destroyed it by taking away the things that I think were the most important to the sport. I think that the Ford, Dodge, Chevy rivalry,
Yes.
the manufacturer rivalries
Yes.
was where it was at. That, you know what? In the old days, that scar on my arm is from Body by Fisher sheet metal we picked up at the Hutcherson Pagan Depot, because in 1988, you built your car from factory sheet metal. It came straight out of the stamping, and you had to go in there and cut. Now, did we weld on it and we modify it? Hell yeah, we did. But those cars began life. The bumpers were real bumpers from real production cars. There's something about that that was just connected and made it real. I liked it, the fact that the rule book was thin and people could come up with new ideas and allow for interpretation. When killed it for me with NASCAR, was a couple of things they did while I was at Gibbs that really pissed me off. They said, I'm done, right? We had a 40 horsepower Summit Advantage one year, and we got in trouble because we hit it. Why we hide it? Because they were going to take it away. Right? It's like, you jackasses, you know? Yeah. But the other part that really killed me was, you know, everyone wanted to get a bunch of front weight on the car. And they tried to get the engines really low. So our guys came up with a really great idea of making the lower frame rails where the engine sits in the cradle where it goes down. They made that as one piece. So the oil pan and all the bottom parts was all one thing that bolted up to the chassis. And we made it out of tungsten. It was awesome.
That's cool.
So we show up at Michigan with this thing, and they kick us out, take the car. You know, you can't do this. The next week, like on Tuesday, they issue an update to the rule book that basically said, I'm paraphrasing, that anything that is not pre-deemed before you get to the racetrack by NASCAR as legal is illegal. That basically says all innovation is illegal. I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. And I haven't really watched, and I haven't given a damn since. Any type of spec racing, I hate. I'm sorry, SRX is spec racing. I don't give a damn about spec racing. I love sprint car racing. I like Formula One. I love pro stock racing. I mean, obviously, Total Seal, Matt Harper's a pro stock driver. You know, these guys are twisting my arm and turning me into a drag racer over here. You know, see you guys. But yeah, give me less rules, more freedom, then it's fun.
More room to innovate.
Right. I hate spec racing.
This last round that NASCAR did, it wasn't so much any one thing, but they took away the 5 lugs, you know, and they went to that paddle shifter and all that. And the way I kind of saw it was they wanted to get rid of all remaining DNA to real cars. That's the way that me as the fan saw it, and I didn't care.
Formula One car, make it go Formula One racing.
That's what I said. I said we already have that.
Right. And those guys run circles around them. So
yeah, our little community here.
Hell yeah.
Goes to this.
Run with your bro.
We are like the opposite of all of that.
See, I love the drag and drive thing. I think that is cool. Like, that's something that I know that if I ever do it, I probably would be an addict. So I don't need to do it. We just stick to our go-karts. Me and Dad have our go-karts. We go race. So I've got All right. Oh, we got a question here. Here we go. Flat tappet engine, high spring pressure. Okay, so piston rings are still the number one. Piston rings are number one source of friction in the engine. Now, you could probably get it down if you get real good on the piston rings and all that, then the spring pressures, it's not so much the friction between the cam and the lifter, because you can actually get that way down with the DLC, right? So if you put because friction is the coefficient of friction of the part times load, right? So if you get and that's in space, right? But nothing runs in space. There's always oil, which is why the thickness of the rings matter, because it's how much oil drag you're bringing in there with it. So if you've got a thin ring package and do that, that will bring the friction down on the cylinders. But if you go down on the spring pressures, if you can get your valve train under control, so that you're not getting a bunch of crazy dynamics going on, that can free up horsepower too. That's one thing we always worked on the plate engines, was run the least amount of spring you can, which means you really have to have a spintron or invest in the spintron time to get your valve train under control. And that's where stuff like the push rods you're running, the rocker stands themselves, the rocker geometry, and what all of that is big. So I think that's a big part of the drag and drive deal. I would say if you're really looking at trying to optimize your setup for drag and drive, I would really focus on the valve train and not overspring it. Try to get your valve train under control so you can take some of that spring out of it. That'll make it happier. Then take as much of that piston ring and piston out of it you can. Really go thin as much as you can. If you have to add piston oilers to it to keep the temperature of the piston down, do so. There's a reason why the Ford EcoBoost and a bunch of these engines from the factory come with piston oilers. You don't need the ring to be conducting all the heat. You can get the heat out of the piston with the piston oilers by spraying up under it.
Fair enough. So what is in your garage? I don't think I've ever heard anyone ask that before.
My personal garage?
Sure. I mean, do you have a hot rod or your daily or
So,
whatever you want to tell us that you drive?
So my daily is a 1999 Porsche.
Yeah.
So a funny little backstory on this, right? Because you're like, what? I know.
Oh, wait,
people know me.
stories you want to tell us are great.
So we were at Gibbs working on the oil thing. We were doing seminars and traveling around the country, doing teaching about oil, just people to understand it. And we did one in Georgia, and there was a Porsche engine guy that came because he had heard about he had seen, right? He hadn't heard, right? He had seen the effects of the lower ZDP oils, because a lot of the old ones had flat tappets in them. So they had experienced it. So he came and listened to the presentation. It was like, yeah, we want to start using this stuff. And then was my first car. My first car was a 1978 Buick Regal 302 flat tappet two barrel, baby. First hot rod part I ever bought was an Edelbrock air cleaner, to make it a chrome air cleaner, and I bought it from Super Shops in Nashville, Tennessee. Right? Yeah, I'm a GM guy at heart. I can't help it. But because that cut was from Oldsmobile sheet metal, right? When my dad had an Oldsmobile. But because of these, I get to know these guys doing this Porsche deal, and we helped them. We actually developed oil specifically for the Porsches to fix some of the problems they had, which were a little bit unique. So we did that, and then things go along. Eventually, Lubrizol got bought by Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. And then they started changing how they were acting about stuff. And we just got a bad sense that, man, things aren't going the way they were going before. We need to make a change. But we knew the chemistry, right? We did all the testing. We knew the chemistry. We knew how to buy the components from people like Lanxess and BASF. I mean, we had figured it all out by then. We were like, we don't actually need you anymore. Sorry. So we came up with our own formulas, buying intermediates from other people and doing our own stuff. We bought a bunch of stuff from Afton. and we came up with a package, and it was actually better than the original Lubrizol stuff was. And so I go to the guys with the Porsche stuff, say, hey, listen, we've got this new chemistry. This is all of our test results, in we'll call it the American V8 stuff. And they're like, that looks great and all, but it's not a Porsche. We got to test it in a Porsche. It's all right, no problem. I'll put my money where our mouth is, right? We'll go buy one of these things and we'll put it in there and we're going to run it and we'll see. So we bought one of these ones that had a blown up engine in it. And of course, the guy that builds engines, we built it. He built an engine and we bought it. And I drove the car for 2 years and we did all the testing on it to prove it out. Like we did the break-in, we did all the chemistry on everything. We did oil samples. That's how I got into doing the oil analysis stuff, was we had to find a way to prove it out. So we had to go run the engine, tear it down, run it back and forth, the whole thing. So ended up driving the thing for a couple of years and to help them out and just help. So we actually would go to a bunch of the Porsche events. I drove the thing cross country back and forth. And I just got to know the people and kind of like the people. And then what happened was, I left Gibbs and everything. And of course I had a company car at Gibbs. We got rid of the car when we were done with the project. But I had a company car and now I went to Total Seal. I don't have a car anymore. I borrowed my mom's old Mercedes for a little while. And then my Porsche buddy, Charles, was like, hey, we're working on this we're building a new engine with the Suma bore, the plasma spray bore. We want to test that out as an alternative to Nicosil. Would you be willing to take my car and drive it and do all the analysis and all the stuff you did, like you did with the driven Boxster? And I'm thinking, yeah, sure. I don't have a car. I'll drive your car. That's great. We can prove this thing out. So that's how we got into doing some of the Suma bore stuff. We did the rings for it and everything. So I've got gas ported 0.9 millimeter rings in my own car now. So why it's my car now and not his is he got a grant. He lives in Illinois. So he got a grant from the state of Illinois to help fund some of the research, but they had to do like a teardown of the engine and present this report to get the grant money. He said, hey, can you bring the car back? I'm like, yeah, no problem. We started looking at the time frames. I'm like, I'm going to drive up to PRI. Why not just drive over after that and bring it to you? Oh yeah, great idea. The problem was that's in December. Big dummy me. And when we were going through, I went through Ohio, went through Cleveland area, and had like one of those giant, Cleveland like effect snows and all that. And of course, I'm driving in this stuff, and I'm scared to death that I'm going to crash. Of course, it is wheeling all around, but I'm not a bad driver. I can still wheel it pretty good. I pull in this place to go get some coffee and have some breakfast because it's just down deluge. It stops raining, and I go to back out of the driveway, out of the parking lot. And this is where that it snows in North Carolina. It snowed in Tennessee where I went to school. So I've driven in the snow a whole bunch, but I ain't driven in that kind of snow. I didn't think about the fact that the bumper could hang in the snow if you back up. It literally ripped the bumper off his car. I backed up and the bumper's laying in the parking lot. And I'm like, whoa, this is bad, right? And I'm stuck and all this. Long story short, I totally, oh yeah, Ohio, yeah, snows in PA, baby. Yeah, that lake effect snow. I went to the AutoZone and bought a bunch of bungee cords and bungee corded the bumper back on the car, and then drove the car back to this place in Illinois with literally looking like Jed Clampett with bungee cords holding the freaking bumper on so it wouldn't fall off. And I told him, about, hey man, sorry, man, I messed your car up. I'll pay for it and everything to get it fixed. You're a good buddy of mine and I appreciate it. Anyway, we get back, and after a little bit of time, it's funny. Other funny stories. We get there, we unhook all the bungee cords, and the bumper doesn't even move. It like literally jiggled itself back into the right spot, and it never came off again. How? I don't know. But he calls me about a month later and says, "Hey, we got the car, engine's finished back up and everything. You can come back and get it if you want to." I said, "You gonna trust me again?" He said, "Yeah, man, no problem." I said, "Well, how much do I owe you to fix it?" He said, "Dude, the car's not worth that much. It was my wife's car. We tracked it. We beat the dog crap out of it. The transmission's about shot in it. The thing's only worth, I actually looked to get the bumper fixed properly because it split some stuff and there's some scratches from the paint and the bungee cords and all that mess." He said, it'll cost more to get the car fixed than it's worth. I'm like, "Man, that ain't right. Just give me a number. I'll buy it from you. Because I need a car." He said, "About $5,000. Sure."
Cool.
The engine's worth $25,000, right? This is a one-of-a-kind Sumabore 3.6 liter, 300 horsepower, badass flat six. I got the car for $5,000. So
Nice.
I got it for a steal. Charles is great. He's a super nice guy. So that's why my daily driver is a Porsche.
That's cool.
Because it's a one-of-a-kind. And I got my own Total Seal 0.9 millimeter gas ported rings in it even, right? So don't tell me you can't run gas ports on the street, because I do.
Oh yeah. So you said you like Pro Stock.
I do.
And of course, Pro Stock went through a lot of change about, 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
A lot of change in there.
Rev limits, yep.
Right. So what are your thoughts about the changes that went on and how they got their power back? And what do you know goes on with, or at least that you can say, with Pro Stock technology as far as getting friction down and the kind of rings they run and that sort of thing?
So the main reason they came up with the 10-5 rule, because essentially you've got the KB guys, or KB Titan now, and the elite guys recognize that there wasn't going to be a class left. Unfortunately, the pre-10-5 limit, those were the most developed naturally aspirated engines on the planet, bar none. They were the baddest ass NA engines on the planet. But the cost had gotten so high that the class was dying because there just wasn't enough people that could afford to do it, because essentially you're racing for a trophy. You can't make enough money racing Pro Stock to pay for it, right? It's not like the 80s anymore where there was enough money in the purse to pay for it. And unfortunately, they still don't have a great TV thing. It's better. It's way better than it was. There's Fox has live races now and stuff, so it's way better. But not being a big show nitro car, it's just hard to get that kind of money to really spend that kind of engine development. So by putting the 10-5 thing in there, they kind of put a limit on it that made it where it could be affordable. And of course, those guys all basically decided they would lease engines and make it where everybody could get it. Matt Hartford couldn't be winning Pro Stock races if he was trying to do his own engine program. He's won races with Elite. He's won a bunch of races with KB Titan, and he does it because of that rule. So it lets it go. Now, the fun thing is, yes, because now you're limited, your friction was always important. Friction's crazy important now. I'm not going to tell you what we do, because they'd shoot me. But as a tribologist, as someone that understands all of these things, it's pretty cool that I get to use my entire skill set. Everything I know how to do, from oil to coatings and everything else, I get to employ all of that with this. It's fun.
Well, I will say that I've seen some videos as late as a few years ago that Hartford was in and showing like transmission teardown and showing pulling the rocker arm, stuff that you just wouldn't see in the pits and Pro Stock.
Right.
That's highly uncommon. So I salute you guys for that. That's pretty freaking cool.
We do the trackside tech talks, like we're at Indy, the Big Go will have a trackside tech talk. We do it right there in their pits. They're literally working on the car right next to everybody. They're not hiding anything.
I think that's great.
They'll change the gear ratio and drag it out, and you'll see.
All right, Joe has a question here. I'll grab it real quick.
Yeah.
He wants to know a little bit more about
we still have the Molly type rings. But a couple of things that go on there of what's the deal with them is that the rings are the number one source of friction in the engine, more than anything else. That piston rubbing against cylinder wall is the number one source of friction. If I can make that ring thinner and take tension out of the ring, two things are going to happen. Actually, three. You're going to make more horsepower. The engine will accelerate faster, and it will run cooler. So from a 16th, 16th, 3/16th ring package to a 0.7, 0.72 millimeter ring package, not only will you gain about 20 horsepower, you're going to drop your water temperature 10 degrees, and you're going to drop your oil temperature 25 degrees. Friction.
Wow.
If you rub your fingers, your index fingers together, it won't get hot for a while. If you rub your whole hand together, it gets a lot warmer way faster. A lot of the temperature in the engine is actually from that friction. So by going thinner, we can make that happen. And you got a great point, Dan, talking about gas ports. So we can gas port the top ring. In fact, I was playing with that this week on the dyno. Here is a gas ported. Oh, here it is. Wrong bag. Let's see how good the camera on my laptop does. This is a 68 millimeter bore gas ported top ring.
Look at that.
For a Honda engine, go-kart stuff. That's a 1 millimeter ring with gas ports. And
That's
the gas
cool.
ports work because you can take the tension out of the ring, and then the ring seals because of the gas pressure.
Right. So the traditional gas port, when I think of gas ports, I think of the little holes drilled in the top of the piston to get behind that way.
Yeah.
And I've heard so much stuff. I've never run anything gas ported before, but what I've heard is stuff like, carbon getting in the gas ports, accelerated wear, et cetera, et cetera. And I know there's got to be better science to this than anecdotal that you hear from so many different people.
I can tell you the real science because I know it.
Go for it. That would be great to hear.
Okay. So if you're looking for the end-all, be-all, maximum power, vertical gas ports are where it's at. Supposedly that was something that Grumpy invented in the 70s. Doing the vertical gas port. So the gas pressure gets straight behind the ring, kicks it straight out. Now, when you do have gas ports in the piston, it will increase wear on the piston or on the cylinder walls. What happens is the piston is moving up and down, but we hope it never turns left or right. So wherever that gas port is on the piston, that point adjacent to on the cylinder wall is going to wear unevenly. Because usually the gas ports aren't evenly spaced out. They're getting better and better, right? In the old days, you'd have 6 or 8 gas ports. Now they're trying to get more and more and more. So they're trying to even it out. But in the old days, there were very few. So it typically made the cylinder into a stop sign. It wore unevenly. So that's why the accelerated cylinder wear. But also, too, on the top, if you had carbon in the fuel, which all of them do, pretty much, it'll carbon up. So it's only good for a while, which is why the drag racing guys loved it. It worked really great for qualifying engines, but we could never run it in a 500-mile race. So then we went to lateral gas ports. We put them on the side. Well, that shields it from the carbon so they don't get as bad. And that definitely was an advantage, but still kind of wears the cylinder unevenly. Then because of, what's happened in professional motorsports is that the rules makers make it where you can't run this. You have to run the same engine more than one race. Well, cylinder bore wearing the rings and stuff was a problem. We came up with this idea. Just put the gas port in the ring instead. Because unlike the piston that just goes up and down and doesn't turn around, what do piston rings do?
They should rotate.
They rotate. So if I put 15 gas ports in the ring, I can put more gas ports in the ring than I can in the piston. And my ring rotates. So now my cylinders don't wear unevenly. And I can also control the size of the gas ports so that I don't have to push it as hard. I just need to get it to seal. So you can play around with the amount of gas port volume this way. So for my street application, I'm running the smaller gas ports, not the giant gas ports. So that's how we can play around and make all this stuff work. And it works incredible. It's not that it's going to give you more power than verticals. Nope. Verticals are where it's at. But this gives you power that lasts and doesn't fall off. That's the beauty of the gas ported ring.
I have a question, but real quick, I'll throw this up from Colleen. She wants to know that you are welcome at the No Name Nationals. If you want to join us, we'd love to have you. It is the opposite end of high dollar spec racing.
Unfortunately, I have to be at the Charlotte NHRA drag race that weekend.
But
we're doing one of our trackside tech talks there that weekend. It's in my backyard, and I'm the one that's got to give it.
I get you, man. One thing I wanted to get on a little bit too while we have you is coatings. Coatings are kind of exotic to me. What are you seeing with coatings as far as what's the biggest value to the person who's building a budget engine? Where do coatings help them the most? What coatings are the most valuable?
That's a great question. Back to my Gibbs days, I was there right around the time the stuff started really coming in. And so we did a lot of times when you're at the cutting edge of something, you see all the dead bodies because it hasn't been figured out yet. So I'll tell you, actually early on, I was kind of an anti-coating guy because it seemed like it was always a variable. Yeah, in fact, Dan Begley is a good friend of mine from Mala. And remember, Dan got on me one time. I was bagging on coated bearings and just ripping them. And he's like, man, don't do that. It's, that's not really the truth. And I'm like, yes and no, right? We agreed that in some applications it's good. Other applications, it can be a challenge. And that was back then. I'm not talking about now. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But back a long time ago, when it was new, we saw all the stuff that wasn't really fleshed out yet. And so it kind of gave you this bad idea of coatings. But that's changed because over time, we started to figure out how to make them work. And we learned things like, DLC is awesome on wrist pins. It's awesome on lifters, not awesome on valves. CRN's way better on valves. Titanium nitride, what makes your drill bit, this gold, work so well is titanium nitride. That's not a coloring. That's actually titanium nitride. It's 2,400 Vickers hardness. It's a very low coefficient of friction. That's why it works so good. And titanium nitride is badass on rings. Right? It's really good. So, and then the coatings on bearings, we actually ended up later on doing some testing for a couple of different companies on coated bearings. And I'm going to tell you right now, coated bearings reduce the amount of wear throughout your engine. Because what happens is if your bearings start to wear, the filter doesn't capture all that stuff. It wears everything else at a higher rate. We cut the wear in half. Now, this was a test where we were intentionally running the engine at a low speed, high load in order so that the oil film was really, really thin. So we basically ran a 0W20 in an engine with 2.8 thousandths bearing clearance, right? So real thin bearing, or kind of looser bearing clearance, not super tight, but not super loose, 2.8 thousandths bearing clearance, right? But ran it with 0.20 at 200 foot-pounds of load at 1,000 RPM.
So it's kind of like the camshaft you designed to try to get that accelerated effect.
We didn't want to kill the bearing, but we wanted to hurt the bearing. And we came up with this test that we could just run it and just do it. And we went from plain bearings, uncoated bearings, to coated bearings. And in that test, coated bearing kicked the crap out of the uncoated bearings. But on the oil analysis, it was everything in the engine. It wasn't just the copper, tin, and lead, the bearing materials. It reduced the iron. It reduced the aluminum on everything. It was crazy. So today, I'm a big fan of coatings. And I would say if you're building a budget engine, I would definitely choose parts that have a coating over parts that don't have coatings. And I would use my budget on that kind of stuff in order to make sure I've got the best durability. We're doing a lot of research right now on new cutting edge coatings that are going to they're going to change the game. This one of them that we've been working on recently with the guys at Southwest Research. It's going to change everything, not just engines. Anything that rubs together, it's going to change everything. These guys are brilliant down there. Essentially, it's a variable hardness coating. So the same coating, same material the whole way through, but it's harder on the outside or softer on the outside. So it will start to wear in without having to do all the other chemistry tricks to make it wear in. But as it wears, it gets harder. Then the friction drops as it gets harder too.
That's neat.
Oh yeah, half the friction as the other good coatings. It's trick, super trick.
Dr. Go says you have priceless knowledge. Well, thank you. I get to learn a lot. That's a huge perk of doing this. So I like to bring good guests like Lake Speed Jr. to you guys, but I'm a beneficiary. I get to listen to this, so I think it's really cool.
And you know what I need to do? I don't know if Brad's still listening or not. The impetus for this new variable hardness coating came from something that I learned from Brad. I appreciate you guys saying these nice things about me. The smartest guy in this whole deal right now is the guy that's not on the screen. Brad Lagman is a true genius at this stuff. He's been working on surface finish for 14 or 15 years. He is so far ahead of everybody else when it comes to honing. It's ridiculous. Oh yeah, put a vacuum pump on a streetcar for certain. Yeah, I would. Again, you want to make sure the oil is going where it's supposed to go, right? Windows trays are a great thing. You want to make sure that right oil, right place, right time, right amount, right place. On your crankshaft on the counterweights is not the right place, right? That's drag. So as much as you can do to get the oil off the stuff, but make sure it's still there to lubricate and to cool. You got to manage all the different aspects. Thank you, Unfinished Project, for putting up
Yes.
his information. Brad's the man. QMP Racing. He's a great help too, right? I've never seen Brad not help somebody when they've got questions and stuff like that. He's just a great resource.
You're welcome to have him on, and we can do this again sometime. You talked about it, and you're certainly welcome back. These guys have sure enjoyed the show. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask them. We've got a few minutes left. The time has flown tonight. I know I've learned a bunch of stuff and had a great time. So
I'm just impressed that people find my answers, man. That's the first time I've ever, and it's always been, stump the chumps. No offense to anybody. It's like, no one's going to know these. It's like Unfinished Project, man. He's the man.
Let me tell you, this is a sharp crowd. We got a really sharp crowd.
When you invited me, I'm like, you're right. Excellent group.
Yeah, this is a sharp crowd. If you look at the greater automotive community throughout social media, these guys are the top of the heap. We got a lot of accomplished professionals in here, and the accomplished shade tree too, and everything in between.
It's nice.
So what kind of stuff projects do you
go
have?
too smooth? Yeah, you don't want to be shop to a 9 on the cylinder bore finish. You don't want it to be too smooth. You need to have some roughness, in a couple of different ways, right? You need, and I don't mean like peak roughness, because that just throws off parts that end up making everything a mess in the engine. That's just debris. You want to have what they call your RVK. That's the valley. That's what holds the oil. And I always yap about that. But what's also really important is the RK, the core roughness. So that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. That's where the ring's going to be touching the cylinder wall. If you think about those valleys as the reservoir, this is where it's actually happening, where the contact is. So if the RK is too low, you're not going to have enough oil to lubricate the interface. But if it's too rough, you don't have enough bearing area to support the load, and you're going to have higher wear. So, like, for example, my dad's engine, the way we honed it, we were about a 10 RPK on the peaks. We were about a 40 RK on the core roughness and about a 70 RVK on the valleys. That's it before we put it together. That's just out of the hone. We put it in the engine, put it in the dyno, ran it, and then we pulled it back apart after 30 minutes and checked the surface finish again. And now the RPK had dropped to like 4. And then the RK had dropped to about 24. Our VK was still pretty much like 68, 69. Put it back together, ran it for 3 more hours, pulled it back apart, measured it again. Now the RPK is down to 2. This is going to be one of my better rings. But the RK had settled in at around 22. It changed just a little bit. And then the RVK was still right around 65. It just settled in. So if you don't have enough RVK, your cylinder finish won't last. You can put an engine together with really smooth surfaces, and it might break in. If you have like ductile moly rings that are really soft and they break in easy, they hold a bunch of oil, but it won't last. That's the thing. You know, you think back to, say, 2002, that NASCAR era back then, it was pretty typical to have an 043 3mm ring package in it, ductile moly top ring. Those engines would live one race, 500 miles, and be down 5 to 8 horsepower. Fast forward 20 years, the guys are running 0.5 millimeter top ring. That's 020. 0.6 millimeter second ring. That's 024. And then a 2 millimeter oil. But they're steel, and they've got a proper plateau finish, and they can run 1,500 race miles. 3 times further, and they're down nothing on power at the end of 1,500 miles. That's why surface finish is so incredibly important. And that's why I've been talking about Brad all night, is because he's the guru. He's the guy we all listen to and lean on for how do you create that right finish. And Brad, because they build engines and they hone engines for so many people, they get all that feedback. You know, it's pretty incredible. Yeah. That's why I have the passion that I do. I might, you know, people say, "Oh, I mean, you're just Energizer Bunny. You're all excited." I'm like, watch me at home, dude. I'm sitting on the couch. I'm quiet. I don't say that much. But when it comes to something like this, that's so important, I can get really excited about it. I mean, this is all the stuff I wish my dad had when he was driving, right? That's why this project Forget My Dad in the Car is so important to me, is that I saw my dad out there struggling as a career, trying to win, trying to be competitive in NASCAR, not having the resources. Then you go to a place like Joe Gibbs Racing and you had all the resources, and you're like, my God, I wish I could have seen what Dad could have done in those kind of cars. Now, I know he would have won a lot of championships, a lot of races, a lot of championships, because he's a great driver. So if people want to know that's where the passion comes from, that's where it's at, is that, you know, trying, I guess, in some weird way, I guess I'm trying to live out, you know, help everybody else. I couldn't help my dad, but I'm trying to help you. Really,
I love that project. And Unfinished Project has put up a link to that. So if you guys want some honing 411, that was a great video. I watched every minute of it. It is really cool. If you like this kind of stuff, you'll want to watch that. So he's got the link to it. And then Joe has a question here. Any recommendations on a profilometer?
Yeah, I'm gonna be biased. You know, so we use the Mediteo SJ210s. That's the one I carry with me pretty much everywhere I go. I got a Zeiss in there right now, but Brad hooked me up with a really cool profilometer holder for it. But the SJ210 is the one that I like, and we actually sell them at Total Seal. We sell it with the complete software package. Mark Malberg makes this incredible software. I'll try to fire this thing up and show it to you here. So there we go, maybe a little bit. So it can show you the trace and everything. Probably it's going to be terrible. There we go.
Let me get you a full screen real quick.
Yeah. So that's a really bad finish, by the way. That's a single grit finish. That's not what you want. What you want is something that looks. So that's Dad's engine after it ran. That's after 3 hours of running. But let's show you the one where it was brand new. All right. That's the finish out of the hone.
Wow. You got all your depths right there.
Oh, yeah. This software is amazing.
Yeah.
Again, Brad's had this stuff for like literally 14 years. I haven't had it 14 months. And he's had this stuff for 14 years. That's why I say he's the man, when it comes to this stuff, But that's to get to that next level, you got to have these kind of tools that can see, right? The profilometer can give you numbers, and that's great. But being able to see the actual trace because the numbers are an average, right? So you could have an RBK of 65, for example, but you may only have like 2 big giant valleys and there's nothing else. Well, what you want is something that's very consistent. You can really begin to see the difference in the abrasives because just because it's a 70 grit or 170 grit from one manufacturer could be different than another one. Like how many stones they have, what's the spacing on it. So it's an art. It really is an art to create that surface that can do it. And we've seen some amazing things. Brad did a block recently for the guys at Shavers on a video we're going to come out with. And we gained inches of vacuum.
Wow.
Just on the hone that Brad did. Nothing else changed. Just changed the hone. And Brad picked up inches of vacuum.
Brad, if you ever want to come on live like this and talk about it, we would love to have you. We're live every Friday, so let's make it happen. I think there's a lot of folks here who'd like to see that. Iceman.
Shop, yeah. That's a great question. You really kind of need to know what kind of equipment they have, and not just what hone do they have, but do they have a way to measure it? That if you're not measuring it, you're guessing. You don't know what you have. So not trying to bag on anybody, but I wouldn't let anybody hone the block if they didn't have a profilometer, or I don't have my own, right? If I'm going to have my own, but with the profilometer, with the software, then you can get it right. You got to know what you're working on.
Now, I saw a question up here, and I have no idea if this is in your wheelhouse or not, but it does have to do with lubrication. Type F or Dextron in your transmission?
If you're drag racing, it is Type F. But here's don't buy Type F at the parts store, because Type F at the parts store is just going to be a mineral based. It's going to break down pretty quickly. It can cause varnishes and stuff in your transmission, especially if you got an old Power Glide. That varnish can actually change the friction and it make it start to slip. So one of the very first products I ever formulated myself was the ATI Super F. So I'm biased. I don't sell it. I don't get paid a dime to say that. But I use this ATI Super F in our vintage clutches on our race carts because it makes the tuning window for the clutch wider. It's consistent. So we don't have the clutch overslip or underslip. And it was all about using a synthetic Type F, synthetic to handle the heat and create the flow consistency, right oil, right place, right time, right amount, but then having that Type F additive package to get the grip. So if I was drag racing, I would go put the ATI Super F in first.
Fair enough. You know what? The evening's flown. It's been a barrel.
Oh my gosh, it's 7 o'clock. Arizona time.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd be thrilled to do a part 2 with you sometime if you'd like to come on. I know these folks like to have you back, but I'll real quickly get a plug in. JB's Little Shop is filling in for Tony's Hot Rod Garage tonight, doing a live on his channel here right after this one. So I encourage you guys to go over there. I'll see you over there. Do you have anything you'd like to plug? What?
Well, I say this: if you've stuck around this long, I'm not, I guess you're bored. I don't know.
Or learning.
But if you like this kind of stuff, I mean, please, if you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, go over to the Total Seal channel. Subscribe to the Total Seal YouTube channel. You're going to see more than me than you want to see. I pretty much can guarantee you that. We have hundreds of videos. We have lectures and seminars. I mean, there's rabbit holes upon rabbit holes of information to go dig out over there on our channel. If you're not a subscriber, go for it. All right, Dr. Go. I hear you.
Well, with that, we'll let you go. We know you've spent a lot of time with us. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll call that an evening. Thank all you guys for coming out, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, chat.